cover, specific things you guys are interested in. Uh, so does anyone
Yeah,
have any questions?
Mark, I'm
yeah,
going
it's a
to
good
ask,
idea to have a Q&A. Anybody have any
I'm going to ask
suggestions?
what.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, I'm going to this person mayor. I can't stand this. Okay, I am very anxious to hear what you describe as the Wi-Fi router that we would use in the case of JMRI's use of the whole product line. My
Okay.
son and son-in-law have both cautioned me that I really shouldn't use my home Wi-Fi. I should keep it separate and isolated from it. If I do that, I need something to replace the so-called Wi-Fi router that I get when I attach Spectrum and or AT&T, whoever I'm using.
Yes.
So what do I do to make that happen? What do I buy?
Well, if you have an old home Wi-Fi router that you've decommissioned, that you can, like I said, pull off the shelf or dust it off, pretty much anything will work. That is a Wi-Fi router.
It just simply doesn't have a cable
You
running over and connecting to the internet, right?
That's right. That's the only piece that you don't have with your home Wi-Fi router setup, or versus your home Wi-Fi router setup, is you just don't have an internet connection. You could, um,
Yeah, yeah, you
but
could do it
yeah,
that.
you can get as advanced and in you can really if you're interested in and knowledgeable about computer network setups, you can make this as fancy as you want. But the simplest setup is basically what we've done with the T-Track portable thing. You just have this router sitting there and you connect your JMRI computer to it, uh, and you create a Wi-Fi SSID, the name, you call it Bruce's layout or whatever you want to call it, give it a password, and then share that, you know, uh, with your operator so they can connect their phones to that. And in that case, to address your son's concerns, which are valid, um, that's completely separated from the rest of your home network. It's completely separated from the internet as a whole. Uh, and it's totally isolated, which is nice because you're not handing out your password to whoever comes over to your house. Although, one would hope you at least somewhat trust your friends who are playing trains with you. You hope you can trust them, but you're not sharing your home Wi-Fi password. You're not providing a way for anybody to get into your home network. And like I said, you can do that basically for free because you can use an old one. You can, get one off of eBay, and it doesn't matter. It can be a Cisco or a Netgear or a Linksys or just and anything that still plugs in and powers up that is a Wi-Fi router will do the job. So you can,
So the key word there is the Wi-Fi route, right?
yes,
That's what you're really looking for, not a Wi-Fi switch or any of those kind.
yeah.
It's a router.
You need a router.
Okay.
Yeah, it
All
just
right.
doesn't have to be a very fancy one.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Now a further question. In the instance of the T-Track toolbox,
Mhm.
for purposes of saving space and everything else, we installed JMRI on a Raspberry Pi.
That's
We
right.
don't need to go into that. We don't need to go into the details of why or when we did that or how it works. But there was a small little card that was inserted into one of the inputs to the Raspberry Pi that essentially is the Wi-Fi router. It was just a small, tiny little card sitting in there, and that's almost like its own transmitter. Like it's got an antenna on it, the whole bit.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes. So that little card or dongle is, dude, really? Um, that is a Wi-Fi adapter.
Yeah, okay.
Uh, and the purpose of that was to give the Raspberry Pi an extra uh, Wi-Fi antenna. And then the router in this case was actually the Raspberry Pi itself was acting as the brains of the router, um,
Okay,
which was a little weird way of doing it.
right. The one thing I would be critical with you about that system is it has that antenna system buried deep inside the toolbox.
Yes.
And when we were at a train show, I mean a convention up in Pittsburgh, and had to use our toolbox, the Wi-Fi signal that was there for the hotel overwhelmed everything else that was going on in the room. I mean, it was like super broadcast.
Yeah.
And we had a hell of a time keeping connectivity to our Wi-Fi system and the trains. They'd run for about 20, 30 feet and they'd quit. And
Yeah, I
it was an
remember that. Yeah.
interference.
Yeah.
And a suggestion was made that what we needed to do is have a better antenna. But that wasn't exactly doable at the time. So your opinion about having this thing as an old Netgear or Linksys router doing the job solves that problem, because it's 100 times the size of the little chip you had.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that any kind of a wireless radio based system is always going to be limited by A, the design of the antenna, and B, the power of the transmitter. The power of the transmitter, of course, is restricted by the FCC, and pretty much any regular box uh, commercial router is going to hit those power limits. So then you're down to the quality of the antenna. Um, and the problem you nailed the problem with using the Raspberry Pi the way we did or the trade-off of that. On the bright side, everything's inside the box and contained and protected physically. Um, but it severely limits the transmit power because the antenna is so tiny.
Right.
That's another thing we could have done with a little bit more work is still use the Raspberry Pi as the router itself, but put an external antenna on it mounted to the outside of the box.
Yeah.
I think
Yes.
physically that was a little more complicated than we really wanted. The easier thing for more power was to use a, a separate commercial router. Uh, so um, so typically in your home situation where you're not moving it around, I wouldn't try. I might use the Raspberry Pi as the JMRI computer. Um, there's no reason. That's perfectly fine if you want to do that. But I would definitely want to use a actual router box separate
Right.
with its own antennas in a home situation. There's no reason not to do that. And it should negotiate just fine with your other home router. They will negotiate with each other and stay out of each other's way pretty well. So
I think the issue that we ran into in Pittsburgh was very possibly an illegitimate Wi-Fi network that had been installed by somebody in the hotel, and it was overpowering. I mean, you went up to your room, and the immediate thing was, Hilton, get in on the Hilton net. You couldn't hardly get out of it. So I think it was just an overwhelming thing that was competing with us, and gave us a lot of trouble in that layout. But we have not had that problem ever since. It was unique to that particular instance. And you're right, you wouldn't have that normally in your house. So So I'm gonna start looking for some of my junk, Netgear and Lynxes, and get some of them up there, and then between Roger and I, we'll have our JMRI Wi-Fi going. One of the things I would like to also add to you is you were making it sound like a lot of people were going to be using their own phones. That may or may not be the issue. You may, as a layout owner, have 5 or 6 of these really cheap type phones that you can give to everybody. And for all intents and purposes, they are no longer interfering with that person's use of his phone and or anything else during the time he's visiting your layout. And I will then also give you my input about why this is better than a hand throttle, like a 402 or a 602. The kids today are so acclimated to using a smartphone that the grandkids that are going to come over and look and play on your layout are going to feel so much more comfortable with a handheld Wi-Fi phone, smartphone. And we see that all the time in the trains day at the library. I mean, there's nobody that takes the throttle and runs it up to the top to see if they could possibly get it to derail. You know how kids will do.
Mm-hmm.
But we have had that happen often on the 402D with the twisted throttle. You know, they just take that thing and they make a big swipe at it, and all of a sudden you got a 50-mile-an-hour train. It's better, and I think they understand what they're doing more with that use of a smart throttle. So from a kid's standpoint, you're teaching them more about how to run the train than you are when you use a throttle, in my opinion. So
I think you have a good point there. The other nice thing is, since you have JMRI as a layer between the phone and the layout control, I think it gives you a chance to put some limits in place. But I also agree. I think because they're more intuitively used to using their phone, they're less likely to accidentally. You're always going to have your kid who's like, let's see how fast this can go. But just your regular kid who wants to operate it correctly, but just doesn't know how. They know how to use their phones. They know what this looks like.
It's very hard to explain somebody about, the reverse and forward function on a
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. It's just, they don't quite understand what you're telling them, how to make it go forward, how to make it go back, and all that stuff. It just,
yeah. And you're mentioning the having the dedicated phones to hand out to your users. I actually have a stack of old iPhones, just whenever we've retired one, if the battery still works at all. And a nice thing about that is that you can spend some time offline, before your operating session. You can customize those to your layout and put your own background screen on it, and have just the train apps. You can remove all the other apps and things from it, and have
Right.
things kind of set up custom to your layout and the experience you want to give, the way you want. And then again, you just hand the throttle. It gets it closer to, here's your throttle, run your train, instead of well, here's the Wi-Fi you need to attach to, and da 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 da. But you
Right.
still have the option, if somebody like me comes over and insists on using my own phone,
Sure. Yeah.
you can accommodate them.
Absolutely. Got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. There's a lot of options, and that's always kind of a pro and a con. Too many options can, you get the buffet thing, like, what do I do? Do I want the chicken or the fish or the steak or both or all three? But it's also flexible to doing what you want.
Now, to the complexity of doing it with JMRI, there are on this phone call not very many people that have a JMRI layout. And so it by itself is daunting to get JMRI started and running on your layout. But it would not preclude you, if you chose to do so, from not doing anything with JMRI except running trains, right?
One
You
of the
don't have
nice
to
things
use
about,
Decoder Pro, you don't have to
yeah,
use Panel Pro, you don't have to do any of that.
one of
Just
the nice,
simply take,
yeah, one of the nice things about JMRI is that it too has, it's this whole buffet of things that you can either use or ignore, and you can totally just set it up to do nothing but provide Wi-Fi phone access.
right,
If that's all you want to use it for, it'll do that and very easily. There's literally one checkbox uh, to turn on the Wi-Fi controls, and installing JMRI and setting it up and everything is a clinic all in its own. But it's really not hard, um, especially if you just want to use it for basic things. But yeah, you can totally pick and choose whatever level you're comfortable with, all the way down to, I just want the Wi-Fi phones, and
right.
you don't have to use any of the rest of it. Totally.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Mark. I agree with you about the JMRI being fairly easy to install and run and all. I wanted to follow up on that question about, well, concerning JMRI and the throttle. Like if you have some kid comes in and wants to run everything fast, did you say there is some way in JMRI you could limit the electricity or limit the high speed for them?
I believe there is. I'm a little fuzzy on the details of how you do that, but there is a setting in there somewhere where you can tell it, don't go more than 70%, or and I know, let's say I'm 95% confident. Uh, there's in the individual hardware systems, like Digitrax, I'm virtually certain has this. The command station can do that too, where you can set a limit for the throttle of the maximum speed. Uh,
Right.
so
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
think one of the
that's absolutely
CVs I
true.
think will handle that.
yeah, so there's multiple ways to do that, but JMRI I'm pretty sure has a limit in there that you can set for the throttle to do
Yeah, I
that.
guess I've got
For each,
JMRI.
for
I
each
guess I ought to look
decoder.
more in there. I've never used the Y throttle on JMRI. I have the Digitrax LNWI, but I should look more. I should look more into JMRI to see what's available on it for the Y throttle, since I have.
Larry, I think you'd like it better because you can only run 4 throttles with the LNWI. If you have
Oh,
a
okay.
fifth person
Unless
who wants to run train, you're out of gas.
it's 4 throttles per unit. You can put up to 8 of the LNWI units on a layout. So,
Yeah,
but
but then you gotta pay, you
you
gotta buy
gotta
another
buy another
LNWI.
unit.
Yeah,
So that's where the cost becomes an issue. Um,
right.
uh, just because you can doesn't mean you can afford to. Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look more into JMRI and see what's there. Okay. Do we have any other question?
Yes, this
Hey,
is Tom.
Mark,
Thomas?
Hey, Tom.
Thomas, I'll let you go. I'll let you go.
So I've got JMRI using Y throttle on my layout, and I've had a few operating sessions where uh, we've only run the trains with JMRI throttles, and I think the most we ever had was maybe 6 locomotives running on 6 different throttles at one time. That doesn't happen very often, but it worked very well. And as far as expenses, uh, I've bought several old iPods. You don't even have to have a phone, just an iPod that has Wi-Fi capability and has the operating system that'll work with JMRI. That's a pretty inexpensive way to get a usable throttle. It does take some getting used to the touch. If you're used to using the Digitrax throttle with the knob in one hand and the uncoupling pick in the other hand while you're switching, uh, it does take some practice to get to do the same thing with the JMRI throttle, but it works.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank
It
I've
does.
been
thank
very
you.
happy with it.
Yeah, yes, it was a good system, Thomas. Thank you for mentioning that. Kevin, did you have something?
Oh, yes. I'm probably one of the few members here at the club that does not use Digitrax, although I can use Digitrax. I do JMRI on my layout downstairs. I use NCE. And it is amazing that you've had this discussion here because about I listen to a guy that comes out every Friday. His name is Larry Puckey. He does a lot of publications for Model Railroader, and he does a lot of stuff with NCE. He just discovered I think a new thing called Wi-Fi tracks. I guess this might be something from DC Concepts, but it looks like a PCP panel and then the benefit of this, if you're using NCE, is that you don't need a router because the router is built into the little PCP card. So that's a benefit, but the side effect is you got to be using NCE, but that's an option if nobody's got DCC now and they're looking one way or the other. I know in Louisville they use a little bit more NCE than they do here in Lexington, but it's something to consider. I got the video here. I'll stick out here in the chat line if anybody's interested in seeing that. But it's basically if you know how to put a PCP panel into your layout, just take that out and put this in, and you got Wi-Fi. And using without any router, because the router is built in there, you can use the phones that you're suggesting. And it kind of the way you hook it in is if you know how you do your PCP panels, you do use the same wires, stick it into this and route it all the way around your layout, and you can still use your control command controls as well. So it's got some perks there if you're an NCE user.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, actually. I had stumbled across that while I was updating, the slides for this presentation, and I didn't have time to really digest uh, how that specific system worked, but I did,
Yeah,
you
it
know,
only came about a month ago, and he's got
yeah,
another video just about 2 weeks ago about how to use rosters. So on there, you can actually have rosters on there without having to use JMRI if you're not wanting to go that route. So, but then again, that gets you kind of away from the industry standard, but it gives you the ability of, without using a router, to have wireless control of your layout plus build rosters. I have not studied that one as well, but it does have that flexibility.
yeah, and it does apparently use the same Y throttle interface, so it should be compatible with any of those apps. I just I didn't throw I waffled on adding it to the options on the presentation simply because I haven't had time to study it. But it does look like an interesting option.
Yeah, I guess the cost, if I remember the cost, they had two different options you can use. I think the most expensive one was $120 just for that part. And once you got hooked in, that's it. You just, whatever else you got in the house, you just leverage, and there you go. For $120, you've got your whole layout, Wi-Fi cable. And I think it is limited to just 4 devices, just like the ones you've been presenting for Digitrax.
It does seem kind of functionally similar to the LNWI as far as the capabilities it gives you. I will note in the favor of JMRI, the way JMRI works is your phone is talking to the JMRI application. So any hardware system that JMRI supports, which is a ridiculously long list of them, JMRI will add the Wi-Fi, allow the Wi-Fi connectivity to. So it doesn't really matter what your layout hardware system is. If you go the JMRI route, you can get the Wi-Fi phones to work on it. But there are reasons why these proprietary or system specific options make sense depending on your layout. Uh, for example, one thing comes to my mind is if I was doing a small like demonstration layout or something that I wanted to be self-contained, uh, you know, and I'll use the Digitrax example because that's what I'm familiar with. But throwing an LNWI under the board would be a lot easier than adding all of the complexity of JMRI. As easy to use as it is, it could be overkill for certain layout situations. Um, so these things like the LNWI or like this, if I understand it correctly, this this new Wi-Fi tracks thing, could make a lot of sense. Like I said, I just stumbled across that, and I really just hadn't had time to really understand it to want to bring it into the presentation. Might be a good thing to add to another. Maybe we should have a clinic on like NCE specifically. Um, I know over here in Lexington, they're kind of overwhelmingly Digitrax, um, but it might be nice to see what some of the options are with the competitive systems. Uh,
Yeah,
just
I'd be interested in that then. Yeah, maybe we do that sometime later then. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe Bob could do the MRC, and uh, we could see what's out there.
Yeah,
You
he
know,
just gave
I,
a thumbs up.
since
I'm
it
sorry,
is so
Bruce.
easy to, since it is so easy to access the JMRI side of things, it seems to me that it might be really worthwhile for anybody that's got a layout to just build it off of the simple JMRI installation. And if that could be reduced to 5 or 6 steps on how to make, JMRI work on your computer, and then how do you make it link into the router, and then how do you do the Wi-Fi throttles? Everybody that's on this call that's got a layout could be able to do this whole thing the way Mark has just explained it. And I tried to make that point about JMRI. I mean, JMRI is capable of doing this as a standalone device. You don't need to do all the other things that frighten people to death, including me. Okay, it
I,
would be an interesting way, for people to get this into their layout.
I would say that if the only reason you wanted to use JMRI is to have Y throttle, that probably doesn't make sense. If you want Y throttle and that's the only function you want to have, then spending the time and actually extra money probably just to have Y throttle probably doesn't make sense. It would probably make more sense to have if you have Digitrax, have their LNWI or whatever you call it, because you invest $68 or $70 or whatever it is, and you've got Y throttle. For
But
me,
JMRI is for free.
yes, but you have
JMRI is
to,
for free.
it is, but then you have to have an interface to form, and you have to have a computer to even use the Y throttle. So for me particularly, the only reason it made sense uh, was because I was already using JMRI to program my decoders. So I had the interface, so I didn't have to buy another interface. Uh, and all I had to do was use my phone. But if I don't think, in my opinion, it wouldn't make sense to use JMRI just to have Y throttle.
That's a good point, Tom. And I'll take sort of a middle ground on this. Um, because you do have to have the layout interface component, the PR3 or 4, or I guess it's also built into some of the newer Digitrax command stations.
Mm.
So you sort of get that for free. And again, the equivalencies in the other brands of hardware, you do have to have that hardware interface. So there is an additional cost in there somewhat. Um, I agree that if you are sure you only want the Wi-Fi, there may be or there may be easier ways to do it
Yeah,
if you're willing to shell out
Right.
whatever the cost.
I agree.
But to lean back towards Bruce's point is if you are interested in JMRI and some of the other things that it can do, but you're intimidated by jumping into the deep end of the pool, um, setting it up to add Y throttle capability as a first step to get it going, get it set up, and learn, uh, and then have an opportunity to start learning the components and the options and adding, and using Decoder Pro or whatever. That's an awfully
And
simple feature to turn on, if your long-term plan is to grow into it and learn about it, but you just don't want to dive into the deep end. Uh, I can't think of a simpler feature to use with JMRI. So
and Mark, it's sort of like back to your beginning with us on JMRI. You started with us on Decoder Pro. And
yeah,
you told us why it was so easy to do Decoder Pro, decoder programming versus the standard way of doing it with a throttle and all the rest of the stuff. I mean, was mind boggling to have to go through all of that to set all of those CVs up and all that kind of stuff. So it's really, if you've already got Decoder Pro installed, it does come pretty much free because there's nothing else to do. But stepping up into that next step, which is where I'm at, of going up into Layout Pro and all of the activating turnouts and all of that, that's very daunting.
yes.
It isn't where you should start in the JMRI. And I'm glad you did this presentation without the implication of the fact you had to do with JMRI. You could do it otherwise. But and I want to make sure everybody understands that that's not my point. I'm not suggesting you'd only use this with JMRI, but it sure is easy if you already got it started. So
Well, I'm really glad that and this probably isn't exactly the right word, but you'll understand what I mean. The industry kind of standardized on this the Y throttle interface, um, because I think it did allow you to have a lot of options that sometimes these people tend to silo things up a lot. Oh, the Digitrax is Digitrax and NCE is NCE, and you kind of saw that um, with those systems early on, um, until we got DCC standardized and so on. Um, it's nice that now there's 6 or 8 or 10 different apps you can choose from, whichever one you like the best, and it'll work with JMRI or the Digitrax or the NCE hardware, and that flexibility. I'm pleased that that's the way the uh, again industry as it was went with this, because I think it did for us as users. Uh, I think that was a big win for us. That could have been a real mess had things gone differently. So some kudos to the developers of all of this stuff. Um, that I think some wise choices were made over the years on that.
Hey, I'd like to get a couple of my 2 cents in too, because I'm probably the only one that runs MRC. I, in your terminology, I'm using the LNWI Wi-Fi adapter on the MRC set. Even though I do use JMRI for all of my setting all of my CVs, and I've used Decoder Pro for setting all of the DC all of the CVs on the things. I do not run JMRI on the system. I'm basically running the MRC system with the LNWI, the adapter, and that's it. And I did check with MRC, and they have told me that you can put 2 of those in series, and the command station will recognize both of them, which gives you the capability of, let me see, I think it's 8 on one of the Wi-Fi, the MRC Wi-Fi thing would give you a capability of running 16 throttles. On the other hand, we have had some conflicts between that of running both iPhone and Android at the same time, and we got tangled up with when we were running 7 throttles. So there's some tech issues that go along with it. But my 2 cents is I've got got really the El Cheapo system of both of them. So back to you.
It's good to know that you can do 2 of those, Bob. I'll the next time we do this, I'll make sure to update my slide on that, because I wasn't aware that MRC could have 2 transmitters or 2 adapters.
I don't have 2. I only have 1, so I haven't tried that. But
Mhm.
that would be an additional cost to add in another Wi-Fi connector thing in there for, pick up the extra throttles. As I say, that the MRC techies told me I can use 2 if I want to, which gives me the capability of more throttles.
Yeah. Okay.